All right, well, welcome. For those of you who are just signing in, we're going to give it just a second for a couple people to show up, and then we'll start our Hangout here. So thanks to those of you who are joining us live, as well as those of you who are going to be watching the replay. Ron, your mic's gotten a little bit loud all of a sudden. I don't know if you switched mics or there's sounds like a vacuuming noise by you.
I can turn it down a little bit.
There we go. Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you for those of you who are tuning in. We're getting viewers here who are going to be watching the live broadcast, and we'll be starting here in just a second. We're going to be taking a look today at Photomatix Pro version 6. It's the brand new version that just came out, and we're going to also be taking a look at that using it with Ron Pepper, and Ron is one of the key support people over at Photomatix. So welcome. Ron, all of a sudden we're getting a whole bunch of audio from your mic. If you could just check that.
I haven't done anything. Let's see.
Okay. Oh, all of a sudden.
Different. Try.
Well, we'll go forward for now. Can everybody hear me okay? If you can respond in the chat pod, that'd be great. And then we'll turn on the microphones here and we'll get started in just a second. So thank you guys for joining us. There you go. Sounds good, Ron. And Ron, you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So for those of you who are here, if you logged into the YouTube page or you click the link on the top of the video, if you're watching this as an embedded post, you'll be able to actually post questions. So the live chat is over there on the YouTube page. So you guys can just click on the link at the top of the video and it'll take you right to the YouTube page, and you can easily log in there and post any questions that you have. So Ron, before we begin, I'd like you to just introduce yourself, let people know a little bit about the type of photography you do, as well as your background with HDR Soft.
Yeah, sir. I'm a panoramic photographer, which means that if you're a panoramic photographer, you're almost always automatically also an HDR photographer because there's always such a wide dynamic range. So I've been using Photomatix since nearly the beginning, not quite, but 15 years or so now. And I got involved with the company back in about 2008, just kind of helping out in general when it was even smaller, still small. But I do a lot of different things for them, such as anything from photography questions. People are asking for some advice on how to use the software, or if there's some technical things, I'll test and try to reproduce things, and just generally involved in and as a power user first, and then I'm involved with the company. So I'm a good person to ask questions about Photomatix and what's going on, and especially for advice for photographers, just because that's what I've been doing for so long.
Great, and we're glad to have you. Ron, go ahead and plug your headphones back in. We're getting some echo with me.
Yes, this Hangout again is not being very nice to me.
No problem.
It says it should be coming through my headset, but it's not. So
go ahead and just mute the volume on your computer then. And we'll get it working in a second. So there we go. So I'll start things out while Ron's doing a little bit of juggling there, but we are going to be talking about the brand new Photomatix 6. So let me share my screen, and I'll just get that started here. And if you guys haven't done so, you can download a free version of Photomatix 6 that'll work as a trial, and that'll let you see what's there. And that's a great way to work with the software. And if you recently bought Photomatix, if you bought version 5, I believe, Ron, that those people qualify for a free upgrade, right? So recent customers get their first upgrade for free. Well, Ron must be getting his microphone squared away. Let's see here if we can get you, Ron. I'm just going to switch you over one more time. I love technology. There we go, Ron. You're there.
Yeah, every time I do a Hangout, there's some technical thing.
You said you knew photography, not Google Hangouts, so we won't hold it against you.
Well,
So.
I'm a pretty technically oriented person, but Hangouts always cause me these.
It's Google, Ron. It's not you. So.
Okay.
All right, so well, I'm switched over, and hopefully everybody can see my screen. And I've launched Photomatix Pro version 6. And things have actually changed a little bit just here when you first launch the application. So it's a new type of way of working, and you can load your photos here, you can browse, or you can drag things in. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to drag a couple of photos in, and you got a few different ways of working. You can bring in TIFF files, you can bring in raw files or DNGs, or you can export from Lightroom. But I got a scene here, and let me go ahead and just make sure that everything lines up. So I see all my raw files here, and I'm going to take in all of these Olympus raw files, 7 of them, that covers this dynamic range for the scene. And it loads it up and sort of shows me information. Now, Ron, when you look at this information here, is there anything that we need to adjust here usually? Or if everything reads okay, it'll just sort of tell you you're ready to go, right? So I'm going to click next to choose my merge options, and hopefully Ron's mic will go back to working. And this gives you a handful of options. So I was shooting on a tripod, so I'm going to tell it that I was on a tripod, and that'll make moderate adjustments if needed. And there's no ghost here because there's no movement or wind blowing, but I was shooting in pretty low light on a micro four thirds sensor, so I'll tell it to reduce the noise. And you even have some options here for raw conversion. So if you are working with raw files, you can tell it if you want to use the camera settings or manually assign it, as well as what workspace you prefer working in. So when I click Align and Merge HDR, it's going to open all of those up and start to align them and put them together. Ron, you got any practical advice here for folks about this dialogue, how not to get confused on things? Check your mic, Ron. I'm not hearing you. Let's toggle Ron's mic on and off and see, and Ron just dropped out. All right, hopefully he'll be right back. So sorry, folks, it's always fun. So while this is merging, what you'll see here is that it's going to align the images. And so if you shot on a tripod, this process goes a lot faster. So it looks like Ron's back. So Ron, when we do that, yeah, I know, it's okay.
Okay,
we
so
can hear, I can hear you. So when
I heard a couple of questions. First of all, if you have purchased a license for version 5, the upgrade's free. Then you asked me something about the initial dialog box.
Yeah, with the merging.
Normally, there's not too much to do. You can double check. It will tell you. It might point out if there's some problems with the images, like maybe like when I take a lot of brackets, maybe I haven't organized them right, and it might show there, just to be kind of helpful there. You can also uncheck the boxes if you over bracket. That's something also that I do. So there's a couple small things you can do there, yeah. But it tells you the exposures of the images. So usually you can move on from that one pretty quickly.
Okay, so I've opened up a scene here, and one of the things that is brand new that's really cool is we have a new method here. So we have a balancer and a compressor. So Ron, what's the difference between tone balancer and tone compressor?
Well, really, those are separate types of, I'd like to call them engines. It's not really the right word, but we're photographers, not engineers here. They're algorithms or engines or ways of, methods of rendering the HDR image. So I'm not sure if you mentioned that really ahead of time, but when you combine those images, the first step that's already happened behind the scenes is that you've created a 32-bit HDR file. And that's what HDR means in a technical way. It's a file that contains all that lighting information.
So we've taken the raw files that started as 10 or 12-bit, and by merging them all together, it now adds up to 32 bits of information, but that's more than we can really print or display, correct?
Exactly, and actually those bit depths are, they're not quite the same. It's not quite the same subject where you're just adding bits to it so much. It's more that there's this type of file that was created a long time ago for 3D graphics and things. But we use that as photographers now because that file gets created, and I wanted to mention that because now the step that we're on your screen is to render that 32-bit image into something that can be viewed, because what we're seeing currently is just a preview of how the image is going to be rendered, but the actual file is something that can't be shown on a normal screen or it can't be printed, at least at this point.
So
that was the long answer.
Oh no, that makes sense. And you know, what's happening here is we've always had different methods, which have been great. And sort of the ones that people were used to, the ones you guys have had for a long time, are details enhancer or contrast optimizer. But this new tone balancer is a really nice natural sort of look. And I like it because it produces a very natural image that matches what I saw with my eye. We can, of course, push it a little bit, but it's really focused on very realistic type imagery. So if you're doing landscape or you're doing interiors, this is kind of popular, right?
Right. That's the idea, is that all of those, when you open that pop-up menu up there and there's all those names of different methods, it doesn't mean too much to you when you first see it. But the point is that there's a lot of different ways that image can be rendered, and the smart people have come up with that list there. And the newest one is Tone Balancer, and it's really easier to get natural results right away. So you have like the Details Enhancer is the original, the one that first came out and sort of made that quote unquote look popular, because it's so easy to get not very realistic results. But there are really good benefits to Details Enhancer when you want realistic and when you don't. They can do, it's kind of I consider it the most powerful, but it just takes a little bit more post-processing. Where Contrast Optimizer is another one that's more realistic right away. And then Tone Balancer is, I think, the next generation now. So that again, where the smart people have come up with a new way of doing it. So
Yeah,
you can get right away very realistic results it's still realistic, but in a bit different way than the fusion options that are down below. Those are also very realistic, but the Tone Balancer is so far, I mean, when I've been using it, it's just quick and easy to get realistic results.
yeah, I love it for landscapes or for interiors. This is just a shot that has a lot of dynamic range, and I like how it pulls it together. We're going to go into all these features in depth. The other area that's new, that's quite popular here, are these new color settings, right? We have the ability to do global color, but also very selective color adjustments. So I can go into the oranges, for example, and start to bring out or tone down the saturation of all of the orangish tones in the scene. And then if I switched over to some of the blues here, I could affect those, or I can go after some of the cyans, and that has a bit of an effect there on the brick. You could see I'm bringing out the color in the brick or toning it down, and I can even darken that area a little further. So it's what we sometimes call secondary color correction, the ability to go after a certain target. Why was this added, Ron?
Just for more control. I'm really loving the color controls with what I do. It just adds another level of accuracy that we can work with. It applies to all the different types of renderings that we were talking about before. And you can also use that brush tool. There's that brush tool icon, so that you can apply those changes just to specific areas. So that's getting to be, so for instance, when you have say a landscape, or in my case, this full all the way around 360, where I'm very happy with it overall, and there's one area that I want to just tone down or punch up or just do some small things. I'm really enjoying that color settings brush. I've gotten a lot of use out of that already with the new version, because it just lets you, for instance, in landscapes, we'll have a lot of greenery, and you want to just bring that area down without, let's say that's outside of a window where you want to maintain what's inside, and that's really dark, but you can really just work with those green colors outside, or the greens and yellows usually with the foliage.
Yeah, and it's great that we can go after specific areas and paint that in, which is very powerful. So I know you got another example coming up. And lastly, speaking of natural images, we've also got the ability to take one of our brackets and start to mix that in. So if I wanted to bring back a little bit of the original photo there, I can start to do that. I can start to paint that in and do it in a specific area, or do it sort of globally, or specifically paint on areas where I want to bring that back. Like here, I'm bringing back a lower exposure level on the rock, and it's got this great detect edge, so it finds it. I can soft brush there, so it's very gentle. And so I can paint here on this front rock surface to sort of use one of the original brackets here to bring that back. Where would you use that, Ron?
Well, it's always been a popular kind of workflow to render something in Photomatix and then go ahead and layer it again in Photoshop or something like that, and then bring back just specific areas. So now you can do that there in the app. So you can save a lot of workflow steps this way. And what you're doing there is a good example. You don't have to bring back 100% of it. You can use the opacity to. In fact, one good thing, and maybe I can show that. Example, but one good thing is just to bring back the overall, say the 0 exposure, and just bring back 10 or 20% of it, and then it just brings it back from. If you feel like you're starting to go over that edge of not looking very realistic, it's an easy fix. It's just to bring back a small amount of it, and then it just looks more like one of the original photos.
Which is great. And then as the quick overview, when we click to go to the finishing stage, there's some pretty powerful things we can do here. Let me just go ahead and hide these other elements so we're not seeing anything else here for just a second. And oops, hid the wrong thing. That's the joy of live TV. So hide others. There we go. And this is an expanded area here with the finishing touches. And we've got, we've had crop before and sharpen, but you added 2 new ones. So we can actually crop to a specific size for delivery. So if I was going to be making a post for social and I wanted to crop for Instagram, I can do that right there. Or if I needed to do another particular delivery size, I could. And you've even put in some straightening tools. So this isn't a good image for it, but if the horizon's a little off or architecturally you need to tilt the image a little bit, you've actually got sort of vertical and horizontal tilt and rotation here. So Ron, I'm sure you got a great example to sort of bring these features to life. Why don't we toss over to your screen and walk us through a photo?
Okay. You're just giving me a moment to... I'll bring something up so we don't see the Hangout. Okay. Am I on?
Yep, we see your screen. Okay. I see photo mechanics right now.
Yeah, I've got some bracketed photos open here. This is one of those extreme dynamic range situations, so it makes for a good example on really the power of what's going on here. And we can preview. Oops, this is one that's already done. We can preview that. Hopefully this is big enough to really view on there. Take that away. So here's the dark image that shows it's a city scene outside. So it's office space, rentable office space downtown. And they want to show that they have this view and you can rent these spaces. So it's a wide dynamic range scene. You could bring in a bunch of lighting and spend half the day getting one shot, or I can bracket these in a few seconds. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going through the brackets there and trying to get out of it. But let me show it in the app. I'm just going to, so I took 9 images at one-stop spacing, so I know I'll be asked that question. Mm-hmm. I'm just dragging them over into the app.
And why do you prefer one-stop spacing, Ron?
The main reason is that I have a Nikon.
Okay, and that's what it does?
Yeah. Outside of adding special equipment, and I do have it's called a promote control, where I can take whatever spacing I want and however many images I want. But my camera allows me to take 9 at one-stop spacing. So that is significantly better than any camera that allows 3 shots at 2 spacing, because I'm getting 9 stops of dynamic range instead of 5. And since I do a lot of interior things, that's very important. Now, having said that, the reason is that I have a Nikon, I also find that it's not something I can say for sure or prove. It's just a feel. I like the results I get better with one-stop spacing. Now, the engineers tell me that 2-stop spacing is plenty of information between the shots. But again, that's just from experience. So I like to keep that. I always keep that window open that shows a new feature, so I can always show it. All right, so in this case, here's that dialogue that you mentioned. It's just showing the initial images. I feel like that one was kind of over bracketed, so I'm just going to take off the darkest one. And I don't have to, but it's just pointing out something you can do here. Because at this job, I went around and I set kind of over bracketing, and I didn't re-meter in every situation. I went from office to office, and I just shot the whole thing. So that's a side tip. These don't need to be aligned because they were on a good tripod. and there's no ghosting in the scene because it's just an interior. There's no movement. So I can just hit merge here. These are TIFF files, so there's been noise reduction applied and chromatic aberration reduction already in RAW. That's why I didn't choose those things in there. If I was loading RAW files, I would probably choose all of those. So here is our initial screen. Let's make it as big as I can. Let that go away. So this is just what loads initially, and I think this is based on whatever settings I'd been using for a different photo last time. But we're talking about the new tone balancer. So first, I'll go ahead and use this filter list over on the preset side. And I could choose the architecture category, which would really apply better here, but I'll choose realistic to show some different options. And I wanted to show it this way because, Rich, you were showing the different types of rendering methods over here.
Yeah.
But it's also good, and I tend to go that route, but I think the world is going more presets now. So there are quite a number of presets to get you close to the kind of style you're looking for.
Well, and what's nice here is you get a visual thumbnail. So, you know, instead of saying, well, I know which category to choose, I can, instead of choosing a technical method, I can choose a goal. So realistic means I want an image that looks photorealistic, a type of image that benefits from HDR without people going, that's HDR.
Yeah, and it's better when sometimes you don't really care which method you're using. You might develop more interest in one or the other and start going more directly to the method and then just choosing your exact details. But it's also really helpful just to see the different options you have. And one reason for doing that is that every set of images is different. Even if it's in the same room looking the other way, there's differences just in the dynamic range and the details in the image. So it's nice to see which one is working the best for that situation. If you're just working on one HDR kind of image every once in a while, then that's really good just to get a good idea of what's close. Like this one is not close for me. I don't want to use something like that. This is not really close for me. This one is very close for me. More detail, I could go architecture, and this would show, for instance, I like the now if you look up on the top left here, you see Fusion Interior. That's really great interior type rendering method.
And these different methods, you know, you said you like this. Sometimes it's dictated by the client. So in this case, you're producing interior photographs for a client. They're going to want to be able to see the beautiful view, right, and, you know, the texture in the carpet, the desks, the highlights. You're really showing off the space. And so this is where HDR shines, right? Because we can see everything.
Yeah, I think if you're going to spend, I'm just throwing a number, I think this is pretty close, $15,000 a month to rent a corner office in San Francisco, you're going to look at that view and that vibe of having that space is going to be really important. So they want to show exactly where this is. So we're now I like a couple of different ways of doing this. I could use Fusion Interior, and in fact, that's what I used to use most. I might be switching now to the new one. So what I did here, just to show a very, very quick way, I clicked the Interior 2 preset, which is a little dark for me, and then I just used that blending slider that we mentioned earlier, and I'm just going to kind of semi-randomly bring it up to 20. Let's put it about 20, and I already have a very close result. There's very little I would need to do to that image from this point. But let's do the same thing with the new method. That's one reason we're here. So I'm just choosing realistic, and I think there's a realistic 2 preset as well in the realistic category. So I can see which one gets me closer. I think realistic 2 gets me closer. And again, very close. I feel like the desks in front are a little dark. So I could choose a handful of different ways to handle it. Let me start, let's just go directly to the brush tool using the color brightness. So I'll just return that to 0 first, I think. I can choose the brush tool, look for an appropriate size that's around that desk. I'm just going to roll right over it very quickly. And I'm taking these settings fairly randomly. Just want to push it. So I can just roll right over it. Oops, clear all. I got to turn the brightness on first, don't I? So now I can just roll over it and it'll just brighten it up a small amount. Or I can increase it so it looks a little more realistic. I can turn the temperature up to give it a little bit more, I don't know, good feel. I can turn the temperature down for, again, a little more realism. And again, I'm already, I'd say 90% there. I remember this. I had a strange color issue here. It's purple in the chairs for some reason. So why don't I do a new selection? Just take some saturation away and just run right over the purple. Oops, that'll take that right away. I didn't like my brush stroke there, so I can undo it. There we go.
Yeah, and so you're removing some of that color fringing there that's caused by the moire pattern and just toning that area down, which is nice. Yeah,
there's probably a couple ways I could go back a couple steps during my conversions and fix that, but that was an easy fix. There's no need to do that. The other obvious thing we could do here would be the blue sky, even though the blue I think is pretty good, and we could play with the colors of the buildings as well. Excuse me. One thing that's the obvious one is I can detect edges, turn the brush size down. Let's go make some crazy. Oh, not crazy. We'll just turn the brightness down and saturation up a little bit of the blue sky if we want to bring that out. Now this, you might argue this is removing realism because it's San Francisco. So
it should be grayer.
Yeah. That's only today. We have a beautiful, beautiful June day of fog and rain, but it's actually blue quite a bit. So I just changed the blue a little bit there. I can play again with the temperature. I like the temperature that it was shot at actually, so I don't really want to do that. So right there, and then with several examples of how that could easily be done, I kind of want to. I think I have a pretty realistic shot there. I might brighten up the interior a little bit more, but right here we're showing, I think what we're showing is the power of what's going on. So there's the original, so the quote unquote middle exposure, the zero exposure. Some people incorrectly say that they shoot HDRs by shooting the correct exposure and then over and under. But my point is that the correct exposure is the whole thing. So that's the middle, and that's what I came up with a handful of clicks while we're talking. Nice. And there's the kind of side-by-side view there as well. So,
go ahead, Ron. I was just saying I have a landscape example loaded up for the other styles of photographers with us. But do you want to show any of the finishing touches here to compensate for any architectural issues? Not saying that you were crooked here or anything. Just
right, but that could have been done. I'm sure that the original was during the raw conversion. I'm sure there was a small lens correction because almost all lenses need a little correction, even the good ones. But you're right. This one doesn't really need anything as far as the straightening goes. But if I had been a little bit too high or too low with the camera, then I would need to do one of these vertical or horizontal straight. So if it had looked like this, that's very common. Mm-hmm. If you look at real estate photos, if anybody didn't know this already, and if you look at real estate photos in the future, and let's just say it's the agent taking the photos, you'll see this a lot.
Yeah, because they're taking it at eye level, right? They're not getting the camera low enough.
Right. They're just not paying attention to that, and that's one of those main things that it's not the pro that did it when they have that, and that's one of the main things that you'll do when you're shooting an interior is first to level it like this at the right height. So and then of course you have a landscape, so you probably can show that better. If not, we can open up that. You and I were discussing that photo, the pier. Mm-hmm. That one it's a good example of that needs a lot of fixing. So
sure. Why don't you get that one queued up next, Ron, and I'll show an example here. And remember, folks, you can ask any questions. If you click on over to the YouTube video, there is a chat pod there. It's off to the right-hand side. So if you have questions about what we're doing or comments, feel free to ask. any HDR questions in general, you are welcome to ask them. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And
my favorite questions rather than monologuing. So please,
sure.
Please.
Yes. So let me share my screen here. And this is Natural Bridge here in the state of Virginia. And this was a 5-shot series. So what I had here were these 5 shots. And this was shot on a Sony. And in this case, Ron, each one is 2 apart. And so these end exposures don't have a lot of information in them.
Right.
But there's a little.
That's something that'll happen, and as long as I like that you brought that up, because one thing that I always tell people is don't think in threes. People say they want to shoot 2 over 2 under, and that's HDR. Well, it might be, depending on the scene. That might have been enough, and in your case, that might have been enough. But you can take more.
Yeah.
And when you have these, the Sonys, like my Olympus has such open bracketing, it's easy to take. I set it for 5 shots at 2 spacing.
Yeah.
And like on a vacation once, I had it set that way most of the time because I had chasing kids around and stuff. So I had it set that way. I didn't want to mess around. And I just set it so that the slowest shutter speed is as slow as it can go handheld.
Yeah.
And then I caught 5 shots above that. And I just over bracketed all day. But I got shots I wouldn't have gotten. So
it's very cool.
Quick side.
So in this case, all the methods are there. And obviously, this is that traditional original HDR look. But again, on a landscape image, I just love tone balancer. To me, it's so easy to get this here. So I'm going to take the strength down and then all the way up. And what I really like there, at a high value even, it's really just doing a good job of pulling out all the details. And the tone is balanced. Like, we don't have shadows that are too dark. We don't have highlights that are blown out. But I love how all the subtle clouds in the sky are coming through. And even through the archway here, we can see things held up really quite well. Now, we've got the ability to override the brightness and to turn that up. And similarly, the whites can clip. So you want to be careful. I might even tone that down just slightly. But the black clip makes the blacks richer, but these two work quite well. Now, what's the logic behind micro contrast, Ron? I'm going to walk through that here. Adding or subtracting, when would you do that?
To me, it so much depends on the image that I don't like you can see some kind of in fact, that's a really good tip is be sure to look, everybody that's interested, look below. There's that question help. You can open up the little question mark down there, and that's a good place to start with the description. I'm always so reluctant to say this is what it does to a photo because in my experience, photos are very different, and you're going to get such a different reaction from an interior versus a landscape, and then from landscape to landscape, there's going to be very bright. There's going to be sun in some landscapes. Some are going to be sunsets. So I just don't like to go out there and say, here's what you do for this one.
I like a little bit more on this particular image just because with all the texture of the trees and the rock, a little bit of contrast is bringing out some of the details for me. Now,
what I tell you is that is a place where you can go, that'll allow you to go overboard.
Yes.
Sometimes.
There's a value of 10 and you probably don't want to hit it most of the time.
Yeah, I'm not into extreme settings on any of them anyway, but that's one of them where you just be careful. You can get a lot of punch, but then it can go too far too.
And another one here that I like to point out is the lighting control. This is where you can really start to see, in this case, we've got some really hard edges. So I want to be careful as I crank that up because I could start to get a little bit of a, there's a hard edge there where there's the contrast. So looking at some of those edges there, I'm going to be careful and just make sure that I don't have that push too far on the lighting side. I actually toned it down a little bit there. Now, this is an image where using the color settings really comes in handy. For me, I like to start with the sky, and this is going to allow me to decide with more or less. And so you see how easy it was to target that. Now, one of the things that I always say is before you adjust the color, actually come down here to brightness, because if you darken the sky, it tends to get more saturated naturally. And if you brighten that area, it's going to get less saturated. So rather than adjust saturation first, I'm going to set the tone that I want. and then finesse the saturation. And then it's a matter of hue, of getting it where you feel like it's natural, what you remember from when you shot it. So usually hue's pretty subtle, but I do find myself sometimes rolling skies ±1 just to sort of get it closer back to what I saw.
You know, there's an interesting thing that I learned really from using bracketed images, is that the color of the sky is going to be a little bit different every time for each of the bracketed images, because after all, what goes into color?
Right.
HSL, right?
Yes.
Hue, saturation, luminance. That's what you see there. So at different luminances,
yes,
then there will be a little bit different color. So that's why sometimes I feel like that's why I end up adjusting a sky color sometimes.
This really is the L in HSL. They just went with the friendly label of brightness, because right. luminance is a $10 word. So
and luminance is elsewhere in Photomatix Pro at this point too. It's part of
sure. Now, on the green side here, I can go in and tweak the saturation and bring that vegetation out really far or tone it down. But I think one of the things that's important here is, you know, in this case, I'm liking how it looks further back, but this foreground tree is just too dominant. So that's where clicking on the brush is going to come in handy. And I could say, you know what, I want to tone that down just a little bit, and I'll detect edges. And now I can paint on that foreground brush and just take that bush down a little bit so it's not so dominant at the front of the scene. And I mean, it's doing a great job of finding the edges there. And I was able to just sort of quickly take the saturation down. And then even after painting, I can still continue to adjust. So sometimes I'll crank this up just so I know I've got the edges right, you know, or I'll shift the temperature dramatically so I can see, oh, I didn't quite get that edge there. And so let's just adjust the size of the brush, and I'll go in and get that area a little bit better so I know that I've selected everything accurately. And then I'll go back and just put the temperature to the middle. You can double click on a slider, by the way, and it resets. And so I just toned down the saturation and brightness there, because this big giant green object was too giant and too green. And now I've toned it down. So sometimes, I think you mentioned that, Ron, too, pushing it so you can see what you're painting and then back it off a little bit so that it goes back to natural.
Yeah. Once it's painted, you can move around the settings too. And I would say, you know, this is still new, the brush tool with the detect edges, but from what I've tried, I wouldn't use the detect edges on the foliage, because it'll kind of be trying to detect all over the place. Yeah. And just get a kind of a soft brush and try to do it a little more artsy rather than technically. But again, this is brand new. I'd use more of the edge detection, like if you were doing something with the blue inside that's through the cave there, for instance.
Yeah. And one of the things I think people forget is they look at a scene like this and they go, oh, I'm going after the green vegetation. That's great. But there's yellow in that vegetation too. So, you know, controlling the amount of yellow is going to affect it, just like there's cyan in the sky. So don't only make an adjustment to blue. There's a little bit of, I guess, color zones here. There's overlap between these. And so if you're going after the greens, you might want to look at the yellow and the cyan. If you're going after the blues, you might want to also tweak the cyans and the purple to finesse things a little bit, right?
Yeah, that's one of the great tip that I learned, is that you work with the yellow when you think you're working with green. I agree.
So now I'm liking this, but I want to blend in just a little bit. So I'm going to take the base exposure for a second and just blend that back in ever so slightly. And I like what it's doing there, but I think I'm going to go with one of the underexposed ones just to bring back the sky a little bit. And in this case, I know something you're not crazy about. I went pretty far apart on the brackets, but it still turned out okay. So I'm satisfied with this. Remember, folks, you can also choose to save a preset. So if you make something you like, of course, take the time to actually save a preset. And that's going to store it in your system, and you can have your own presets loaded here on the right. So, Ron, do you got another example queued up that we can take a look at?
Yep, I can show them. How much time are we looking at?
We're still got about 15 minutes left.
Okay. I could do samples all day.
Sure.
Let's see. So I just loaded one up to save a little time while you were on your screen. But I can still show what we started out with. So there's a whole bunch of brackets. Also a one stop spacing. So I took extra, and I believe I saw a question about, hold on, I'll just go behind the scenes. Someone asked, does he always shoot in RAW?
That's a great freeze frame, by the way, Ron. I appreciate that.
Oh yeah. So there we go. Shooting in RAW, I always shoot in RAW, but I tend to convert them first in Adobe Camera Raw usually, just to get the best RAW conversion. But
yeah,
it's up to the user. The RAW conversions are getting better all the time in Photomatix, so I might start changing that. And then if 3 exposures, what do you recommend? I recommend more.
yeah.
Actually, there's a post that, in fact, the photo I showed earlier of that sort of interior office with San Francisco outside, I did a post about how a few different ways to shoot that. So you can take a look on Photofocus. Search for me. I don't have that many posts, but if you see that image, it talks about how a couple different ways of handling that quickly. If you only have 3 in the camera, you can always take 2 brackets.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on a tripod, it's no problem. I even know, I think, didn't you and I, we had Scott Kiewicz on one time, and he was talking about how he just starts on one end of the spectrum, like say the darkest one, and then just changes it. One, takes a shot, changes it a stop or 2, changes it, takes a shot all the way up until he's reached the other end of the spectrum, and then that's how he handles it. So.
And I actually did something the other day. I was out shooting with Kevin Ames, and what we did was we were shooting sunsets in the Valley of Fire, and we just kept the cameras on tripods and started about a half hour before sunset. And I was shooting time lapse, but I went back afterwards and just manually picked images and combined them together.
Right.
And bracketed over time and let the sky change, and it worked. So I let nature do my bracketing.
You took your time lapse source images and bracket. That's awesome.
Well, Kevin was the one who gave me the idea, so I got to give credit where it was due.
Well, I always love to hear something new. I got another new way of bracketing that I need to write about that I can't think of who told me, so I don't want to say it here. So here we have the Pismo Beach Pier, and it was pretty extreme dynamic range, where one shot wouldn't be able to get any details under the bridge if you still wanted to keep the sky. Here's the initial combination in Photomatix that it came up with the default settings, details enhancer. So already you can see why that would be needed, again, from just one shot. So that now we can see all the details under the pier and the bright sky. So among the problems this image has is it needs a straightening and needs a crop. So I'm aware of that, and that happens later. And but this is good dynamic range scene to see. So let's go back to our realistic version. So usually I find that realistic tends to doesn't mean that it looks fake from having too much saturation or too much color. That's not always why something doesn't look right. It can look fake just because that's not what a camera can do. So,
right.
So sometimes bringing it back a little bit is the way to make it feel more realistic, even though the colors and everything are correct.
Well, because like underneath the pier there, it's great that I could see all that detail, but it's almost more than I would expect to see, because
exactly.
You're going beyond what my human eye can even see at that point.
Probably not that far.
I don't know. I'm old.
Well, maybe it is. It's hard to recalling this in reality. I don't know for sure, but you're right. Do you want to see everything like this, like where it's so obvious like this? Where look at this, look how bright that is. That's not. No, that's not what we want. I should mention this was shot at pretty high ISO, which is a no-no for HDR because people say it adds noise. It doesn't add noise.
Combines it all.
Well, no, it actually, this method is called details enhancer. It's going to enhance everything. So that's unfortunate, but keeping the noise down is really important. Still at I think 1000 ISO, so not that high, but there's noise in the image, and I think it's handling it really well. And I did load raw files in this case, by the way, so it's handling it really well, I would say. So I guess if there's a lot of noise in the image, look at why, because it isn't really something that is created when you're doing HDR. So let's just do a couple of fix-ups to this one, because we weren't really talking about our tone mapping so much at this stage. Turn the temperature down for the sky. Let's saturate a little. I can blend with the original a little bit. Okay, so we're pretty close, I guess. What else can I do really quickly? For me, you'll notice that there's not a lot of tutorials out there talking about what exactly each one of the sliders does. There's a good reason for that, because I've been using this forever, and I still just try and see what they do for each individual image, and that's, you know, for better and for worse. Okay, if it was a 360, there's your 360 option, so it evens out the sides. I'm using a small screen, so I have to scroll through them, but typically it shows it all at once. All right, so let's go ahead and take those settings as good for now. It's going to just render that into a viewable image. So now we'll be able to save this image as a JPEG or TIFF, so you can use it the normal ways. And here we found our straightening options. So I was I've been playing with this image before, and I know that it needs just a little bit of rotation just to get that horizon straight. Even though it wasn't that noticeable before, once I straightened it, I realized, wow, it really needed that. And then needs a little vertical straightening as well, a little less than that, I guess. All right, so now our posts in the pier are straight, don't feel so strange anymore. And I'd like to crop away some of this, because really I think the subject is the sky and parts of the pier, and there's too much beach there. And so we'll do a crop and apply there. Kind of willy-nilly, but so we were able to use pretty much all the options right there in Photomatix Pro without having to necessarily use other software, and that's going to be really powerful. I wanted to mention, maybe we can go back. In fact, let's do that. Let's reset that.
And John had a question that I'm ready to show in just a second once Ron is done, and that is applying Photomatix to a single photo, which I'll do in just a second. So it works best with a raw image, John, and I'll show you that in a moment.
I can hit redo with other settings, this button here.
I love that option. It basically is like, go back and make another version. And what I'll sometimes do there, Ron, is I'll make a black and white version, and then I like to mix those two together. Yeah,
I like that idea. I'm going to try playing with that now. Man, sorry, bad today. So redo with other settings, I could, one use for it is just I could save what I had done and then hit the redo with other settings button and be right back in here and just do a whole different style. The reason I did it this time is I kind of intended to show something that I forgot. Is a nice use for the brush tool is deghosting.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that ahead of time. When we came in, I could deghost this and make the water. I could just change the way the water. It doesn't really need it because it combines and it just looks like moving water. But if I want to, I can use the brush tool and just put it at 100%. I'm just guessing which source image is using 0. It's too dark, so we'll make that go away. Use a brighter one. And just paint right over so that now the water has just one of the source images. Actually, it's a 50% now. It's on. There we go. Just one of the source images. So that had, depending on which one you use, you won't be able to use all of them, because watch, if I use the brightest one, it just won't work. It's too bright. But you'll be able to choose between the ones that match that brightness of that particular part of the image. So the darkest one is being used more in the sky. We get the idea, right?
Yeah.
But if you take the 0 or the little bit brighter, oops, excuse me, a little bit brighter, then I have, if I didn't deghost in the steps to start with, and I had missed a car moving around in there, I can actually deghost a crowd or a car with the blending tool. That's just kind of I think it was a side effect. I don't think that was an intended use for it. But,
yeah, it's nice for those spot fixes.
Right.
Good. Well, I've got an example of a single image loaded up, and this isn't the normal workflow, but it is one that works. So let me just switch on over here, and I've got a raw file here. I'm going to take the one of the exposures here, and I've got my base exposure and some under exposures and higher exposures. From visually, I like this one here. So I'm going to use this as a starting point, and I can bring that single raw file into Photomatix. And Ron, we've got this option here to enable exposure fusion, which is kind of a cool option with it if you only have a single raw file, right?
Yes, I love that option. I've been a big proponent of exposure fusion for so long. It's a little simpler process. It's great for realistic images quickly. You know what it's really great for? Noise reduction.
Yeah.
Not the way you're going to use it here, but if you have bracketed images, or even if you just took the same image over and over at the same exposures, you can combine them, and it has a nice noise reduction.
So in this case, it's going to essentially fake the HDR by pulling out different exposures from the same raw file. Right. And so it does that step. And then in this case, I don't have any chromatic aberration. The lens doesn't have any super high contrast areas. It was a high quality lens, so I'm not worried about it. But you could adjust for those sorts of things. And so now I'm going to click the HDR rendering, and it's going to convert that file and open that up. And this works best. Now, you're not going to be able to use all of the HDR methods, right? Some of these, if you don't have truly bracketed files, some of the different HDR toning methods won't be available to you, correct?
No, they will.
Okay. Do some work better than others?
Unless I'm forgetting something.
I guess they're all there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Nope, one's missing. I forget which one, but one of them is missing.
Oh, is it one of the...
it's one of the fusions, I think.
I must be forgetting something. Is it one of the fusions? It's got to be.
Yeah. So, but look at this.
The two
image one. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, of course we can't do the 2 image one because there's only one image.
Yeah.
But let's try that new tone balancer. And I mean, I got to tell you, as a one click, I opened it up and just gave it a single raw file. This is incredible. I mean, compared to the original photo that we started with, you know, which, yeah, it's got good dynamic range, but look at how it brought out so many details and such great contrast in the image. I mean, this is awesome, you know, to be able to go in here and I could just pop the blacks and the whites a little bit to push that even further. And I mean, it did a great job, Ron. And I mean, I think this is what's awesome. And then, of course, we still have the ability to target specific colors. So if I say, you know, the red just doesn't feel like the red that I remember, I can roll that. Yeah, that's the one. It was more of an orangish color a little bit. It was just thrown off by the lighting and just a tad darker. And, you know, I'd also like to tone down the oranges just a little bit, you know, and I can go after that, this area back here that was distracting, that was sort of dominating, I can tone that in. And now the plane takes on sort of a more brownish feel too. Nice. And so very quickly, I can color correct, I can get the right contrast. And I mean, I really like the tone balancer method. I've fallen in love with it for natural looking images. You know, tone compressor, very different feel there. Like now the blacks are muddy to me. So I think tone balancer is perfect for single image HDRs. And I do have to clone those legs out later, but that's a small step. You can't control museums. I didn't have the run of the mill. But what do you think, Ron? Any suggestions?
Yeah, I like it. You know, using one image with Photomatix wasn't the intended use of it. It's for bracketed images, but I know a lot of people are doing that, and you can really pull the maximum out of that single image. Where, you know, occasionally I'll be asked, can't I just do that in, you know, fill in the blank in Photoshop? Well, sure you can. Right. And if you're really good at that application, you can. So there's, you know, if you just like the tools in Photomatix that are made for that, even though they're not made for one image, they are made to pull the full dynamic range out. Then the tools can be really powerful, and maybe it's something that you're not interested in spending a bunch of time in Photoshop doing it, and you like the results. Then, yeah, I mean, by all means, I've used it. I've used it for things actually as well. Just a difficult situation where there's just tons of movement and it's not very practical to take a lot of brackets or whatever the case may be. And I could still get the maximum out of one shot. And it's a very powerful tool.
And using the finishing tools here, I was able to refine the shadows and the highlights a bit further so that the whites really popped here on the teeth to separate them a little bit more from this bluish undercarriage while still keeping the right balance. I love the fact that we can do additional sharpening here so that we can bring out some of the details a little bit better. And remember, all digital sensors do a little bit of softening once the file's processed. So on some of those fine details, it's great. I could decide, I don't have time to clone, but what I want to do is just crop that out so I can recompose this image here and just lose that person. There we go. And I'll apply the crop. But if I change my mind, I can reset. And we've also got that ability, as we saw before, to straighten. And I love the overlay grid here. So I can see, for example, on this overhead beam, I'm just slightly off. So the ability to just rotate that ever so slightly, there we go. And now that's lined up for that, thing that seemed dominant. And so to be able to do all of that stuff right within the tool is great, that we don't have to switch. And if I decided that I needed to tilt the image a little bit, to have that flexibility there to sort of fake the camera angle. Now, don't go that far, but little changes. The key with HDR is little, right?
Well, actually, and when you're doing that vertical, you're just changing the composition. There was a couple. I thought there was a couple of good ones. Yeah, like that. There you go.
Yeah, and I would have to be much taller. I would have needed a 10-foot tripod to pull that shot off. So
that's one of the things that's used for, is for buildings that you can't get up high enough to get it straight, so it looks like the building's kind of falling backward a little bit, and you don't have the money for a tilt shift lens or experience to use it. Well, you can adjust that in software, and so there's a lot of people out there that don't need to use another application now, architecture, real estate, landscape.
Yeah, and that's what's great here. Like, in this case, I've merged the HDR for the interior, but I just want that window to be a tad darker. I can just click right on it, and with edge detection, it finds the edges, and I can paint that window down and say, a little darker, little richer color. There we go. And now I've got a view again. And it's great that I didn't have to go and grab another photo. I can just, there's a screen on that window. So it's diffused screen, but it was a little lighter than I wanted. I wanted to emphasize the area that was out there, or to say, this front glass is just a little too much. I'm going to make a new selection, adjust the size of my brush, and tone down that glass a little bit. There we go. And I can just click right there on the glass and paint the window down a little bit, so that reflected area wasn't so dominant and catching the eye. And I didn't have to switch programs, and I could just tone that down a little bit and say less saturated, a little darker, roll the color temperature just slightly. And it's great. We can see that before and after split between what we got or what we were able to capture. And, there's just so much more that's been brought to life here.
Yeah, it's a lot more targeted adjustments when you just want to take more and more control. I'm the same way with the windows, is using the color adjustments to, the color, the brightness is one thing, and then there's of course the different types of light. There's the interior lighting is lit by man-made light versus the sun. So there's those really great little adjustments you can do there. I didn't bring up an example that needed it so much, but there's the classic interior scene where there's a blue light shining across the table from the window, bright blue, because it's just you have different light sources. Well, now you can just use that color tool and paint in, changing the temperature.
Excellent.
And so that can change like if I'm doing an interior of a house or a hotel, that's very common, and that's something that interior photographers have been fighting against forever. And now there's in most of my tests anyway, it's been a really easy fix.
Good. Well, Ron, we got time for one more quick tip if you want to show anything else inside of Photomatix. And we've had some great questions today, so we appreciate you guys asking those. Remember, the idea here is that you just want to produce a natural looking image and be able to really bring more to life. So while Ron gets his screen up, I'm going to show one more quick example.
Well, I can show them. I didn't realize that I wasn't showing it already.
Oh, no problem. Here we go. So in this case, I was shooting handheld at the beach, the boardwalk in Huntington Beach, California. And one image did a pretty good job but I wasn't happy that some of the highlights in the metal were getting missed and some of the details in the tire were getting muddy. So I was able to just shoot this. This was just a handheld shot. And as such, I'm going to say, oh yeah, this was shot handheld. And I'm not going to give myself credit and say minimal movement. I'm going to say standard because but this is how much movement you thought was there. Minimal would sort of be like you were bracing the camera against something, and minimal standard is sort of, you exhaled before you took the shot. And so this looks good. I'm just going to say align and merge. And it's going to compensate for any of that slight movement. But where this really comes into play, and we've been really hammering on the photorealistic side, is I just want to show you how well Tone Balancer works in this case. So, I've got, if we look at the original image versus the new image, you see that the highlights and the richness are there. And even the shallow depth of field is a bit affected by the HDR merge. But I like this because now I can say, let's take this a little bit stronger and look at how the tire just comes back to life. That tire that was just muddy and lacked all the character, suddenly all the detail is there in the tire, but it still looks photorealistic. And I could bump up the contrast a little bit, and I'm going to play with the lighting setting here. And I just love how the shadows can be sort of filled in. And it's very interesting how it goes after those areas. Or with white clip, how I can make these bright metal spokes really pop. And I love that. And again, with those targeted tools here, if I feel like, everything's great, but the bike's not quite right, I can go after and bring out the richness of the color on the bike. So it's a little bit more and just a little darker there. Now I'm getting more separation between the bike body versus here. I switch over to the yellows and I could say, let's put a little bit more or a little less. Maybe I want the bike to look tan, or I'd like a little more separation between it and the sidewalk. And it's just great at how much control we now have. And I mean, if we look at the split screen there, you can really see the difference, or the before and the after. It's still a photorealistic image, but the details that couldn't be seen in the single base exposure are there. And then the ability to push that further by further tweaking the brightness and saturation values of certain color zones allows you to further create contrast within the photo. And so not just contrast like I crank the blacks up, but contrast meaning visual separation between the elements. So that's a great tool so you can better define your subject. So my foreground is popping more from the background. So Ron, you got one more example loaded up?
Yeah, let me
go ahead and share your screen when you get a chance.
Let me show two, probably very quickly, hopefully.
Yep, we don't see your screen yet. Just
yeah, coming up. It's coming up. You see me now?
Yep.
So this is an image from a long time ago, and I keep it around because it's such a challenging shot. It's hopefully my buddy watches this, who's used to live here. This is his old house, and I just shot it for a sample one day, sitting there. And it's always been it's so extreme of dynamic range that I look at the guitar as black and it's burned out in the sky. So I like to test it whenever I can. And so the realistic, again, right away brings it pretty close. I won't even go to realistic 2. Gets it pretty close. And then I can play around just to keep it realistic. I'm just doing this very, very quickly.
I love how the guitars come back to life now.
Exactly. And this is one of those where, again, this is just me with my ramblings about HDR, is that when they're so extreme like that and you don't shoot the brackets well enough, that's when it's going to look fake. But I bracketed this one all the way through, and it was still difficult to get a good result, even in every test I've ever done. And So again, that's why I loaded it. Now, with this one, it's so much easier to get a good result because I can do things like using the brush tool and just go ahead and, if there's something I'm not happy with, like I want the sky to be a little bluer and darker, right? So let's just do that. Very simple. And I'm just taking some random settings and go around here a little bit. Okay, I kind of like what it's doing. I'm going to hit the detect edges just to get this, the top part. And I won't do the whole thing, but I'll just do it. Now I can continue to adjust color and saturate some more. Can go to just the blues, of course, just like we were talking about. And, you know, pretty quickly and easily get to that space that I want. I'm leaving it to look realistic. I could go much farther, but I can just go ahead and do it instead of messing around. Now the same thing goes for the guitar. So we can bring that one up. Add some temperature to those interior ones. So there's some details in the guitar. In fact, there's so much detail that all it is a reflection of the wall next to it. So that kind of takes away from it, but I can choose exactly where I want it. There's not a color cast in here, but just painting right across this table would be an example of what I was saying before, where if it's a window, it would be coming in different color, different white balance. So I just paint right over that and it's done. Let me just, I'm just going to close out of this one because I know we don't want to keep everybody too much longer. And I wanted to show another difficult scene that I have here. So I'm showing all the most difficult things today in a live demo. Okay, so again, I don't need any of these things, pre-processing. Live demo showing things that I always found difficult to work with, not things that I found easy to work with. So what do you think about that, Rich? Is that a bad idea?
It's tempting what we call the demo gods, but it's your side, Ron.
Well, I never get caught not trying. All right, so here's one. Here's one. I'm just going to brighten it up a little bit so we can see everything. Oops. We can use realistic settings if we want to bring micro contrast down for that one, I think. Clip up. Just want to get it lightened for, oops. Ah. Don't forget to try turning the strength down sometimes as well. It's not a bad idea sometimes. Okay. All right, we're close enough that we're looking at a scene that we can see that most of the dynamic range. I like to use a histogram. You can see that it's all contained in the histogram, so we have something good to work with. So here's where the colors are a little off when it's coming in. See on the right, I'm not sure how well this will be, how viewable this will be.
I see a little bit of a bluish cast reflected
exactly.
on that brown leather bench.
Yeah, when I was trying to think of an example, this is the one I had handy, so that's why I have this one. So we can just go ahead and take the temperature. I opened up the brush tool, turning up the temperature.
And pulling it to the right is going to warm that up. So
warm it up, yeah.
So the blue
is very cool, and moving it to the right just warms it up. So that just takes away that blue cast that came on that tile floor and that brown storage, whatever that is there. And if I want to do that to the exterior, I can do that as well, which has the same, also has the effect of just bringing it out some more.
Yeah.
And
it's dealing with the fact that there's two very different color temperatures of lighting in this scene. So making them match a little bit better gives you more unity from foreground to background.
Right. When you try to average it out when you're shooting, then you just end up with less good on both sides. So usually I've tried to use warming filters in Photoshop, but it's an extra step that now doesn't have to be done that way.
Now, Ron, do you ever get fancy and change the color balances for different parts, for different brackets when you're developing, using one color balance for the interior and a different color balance for the windows?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. Cool.
I've tried that. Where you shoot raw and then go ahead and adjust in Adobe Camera Raw or whatever. You can even hit auto and it'll choose one for each one, and then you can convert it. I've tried that with mixed results. You know, it works especially if you control it. If you choose sunlight white balance for the exterior shots, like so maybe the darkest one or two, that's helped. But I've still found that I always need to make a little tweak afterward.
Yep. All right. Well, folks, we are getting towards the end of our day. I wanted to say thank you for those of you who joined us live, as well as those of you who are watching the replay. One question that came up that I wanted to make sure we addressed is there was a question that says, I was using the beta. When will the new version be coming? It is out. So it started shipping last week, and you can go get it. Ron, if somebody is not a customer, what does it cost to get Photomatix Pro? And if they are a customer and need to buy an upgrade, what does that cost?
$99 and $29.
There you go.
So one of the really great things is just go to hdrsoft.com, go to the download page. Anybody can download it anytime. It's the trial doesn't expire. It just adds a watermark when you process. So you can try it as long as you want. There's no, I know for me, the 30 days always run out and then I get in trouble. So you can do that, and then if you have, people get a little confused. If you have version 5 is one thing. It's because where you might have purchased version 4 and gotten a free upgrade to 5. Everybody gets a free upgrade to one version. That's what I wanted to get across.
Yes.
If you had one before that, it's still $29. So if you use it with any kind of frequency at all, I mean, to me, it's just a steal.
Well, for example, I bought Photomatix version 2. That was the first version I bought. I got version 3 for free, and then I paid my $29 for version 4, and then $29 for version 5, and $29 for version 6. You guys have been very consistent. So
yeah,
I appreciate that.
It's amazing. The prices, it's been a long time. The prices don't go up. To me, that's pretty unusual.
Yeah. Well, folks, thank you for tuning in. We do have a great learning center over at Photofocus. So if you go over to photofocus.com and you click on the top bar, there is an HDR Learning Center that's filled with tons of articles. And as Ron mentioned, you can go ahead and download Photomatix Pro from the HDR Soft website. As you saw here today, with that new tone balancer method, whether you're shooting brackets or even multiple images or even single images, you can get more detail while still producing very cool, completely photorealistic images. Ron, any other additional information for folks?
Yeah, do what I did if you're new to it, or if you've tried HDR before and been frustrated with it, because that's what happened to me. And the way I got over that was I spent about 2 hours reading through some FAQs on HDR Soft website. And that was a long time ago. They've gotten a lot better even. So you'll get great advice for shooting, like how come I'm not getting good results? So there's really great advice for those kinds of things. And if needed, support at hdrsoft.com. I'm part of that, and it's a real responsive group. Whether if you ask photography questions, you'll probably get me replying. If it's more technical, maybe not. But anyway, use those resources, because there's no reason not to. If you wonder why people have success with their HDR photography, whichever category that is. I love it when someone looks at something I've done and says, I wouldn't have known that's HDR. Well, that's kind of the point, is that it's a tool to replace lighting for me. It's not a style for me. A lot of people it is. So if you're looking for something and you're not able to quite get it, hey, ask some questions or check out the website. It's really helpful. And the HDR Soft Learning Center on Photofocus, Rich and I have both written some things and some things like this. There's a lot of help for you, so use it, please.
Great, and thank you guys for tuning out. Tuning in, I should say. We're going to be tuning out now in just a second, but we will post on another Hangout. We typically hold these about once a month, and we'll have some other topics in the coming months as well as guests. So we will cover a wide range of different styles. So whether you're going for photorealistic or fantastic, shooting landscapes or interiors, we'll cover different workflows so you can fill things in. Ron, thanks so much for joining me today, and thanks to everyone for tuning in and watching.
Everybody.